All right, so I'm going to get into the good stuff. So we are all right now facing a new norm. It might not really be a new norm. It's actually kind of our new expected norm, should I say, of the network way of working. And so when I started thinking about this work and talking about networks some years ago, this slide used to say like a new paradigm, and it was all about how people were just starting to build partnerships and work cross-sector and think about how to leverage those kinds of things in different ways. And it was a new concept. But today, if you are not working across boundaries, you're almost not, you're behind, right? Whether you're in the public, private, or nonprofit sectors. And what we know now is that it's so normative that people have jobs called network leader, network weaver, which also means that you probably have a job performance evaluation. But in that evaluation, we are expecting you to be a network leader. We may not be giving you the skills and the things you need in order to become that network leader. And so we've found 10 years later that there's a gap in the expectation for people to be this way, to be working across boundaries, and not giving them the skills to do it. So that's what we're doing with the NLTA, is really trying to fill that gap and say, how do we actually build the skills to be the best network leaders that we can, especially in jobs, you know, where our titles are epidemiologist or program manager. It's not network leader. So that's what we're up to. When I say networks, this is what I mean. I mean a bunch of nodes and lines. You might call this a collective impact, coalition, systems, ecosystems, whatever it is. We use the nodes and lines at Visible Network Labs and the Center of Network Science because we measure networks. And because we're measuring networks, we need objects to measure. So in this case, our nodes are organizations or people. Now that we're talking more about systems, those are also thoughts and ideas and places. And what we know is that the lines between those nodes are the relationships. And those relationships can be anything, but it's the things that we are defining them to be by some measure. And so this is how I'm conceptualizing a network. So whatever your nodes and lines are, be they organizations, people, or thoughts and ideas and places, and whatever those relationships are, that's the construct by which I'm going to keep talking today when I refer to networks. And you'll get to see lots of examples of them. Something that's happened over the last decade. So I'm 44, mother of 3 girls, and been doing this work for 20 years when I started it at the Rand Corporation, and the growth of networks has expanded over the last decade. So when I started, we were reading stuff by like Walter Powell that said, you know, neither markets nor hierarchy, networked forms of organizations are the way. And the whole field of public affairs that I come from is just full of work about how networks are an interesting form of organization and why they have advantages. I don't know if anyone, I hate that I can't like ask you all really good questions, but I would normally say, does anyone know who this is? You can pause a moment. This is Elinor Ostrom, who was the first female to win the Nobel Prize for Economics. And of course, in the last round, we just had our second female win that award. But Elinor Ostrom talked about collective action and free riders, and she is one of the key pillars of our thinking around networks. And so this is some of our foundations. What happened about 6-7 years ago, maybe even a little bit before that, was networks suddenly became really common and really attractive to people as ways to solve big problems. We learned the term collective impact, and we learned that there were 5 ways that a collective impact should run. And, you know, the world kind of took off with that. Funders knew what to fund. People suddenly knew how to do the work. And collective impact became familiar. And that was a huge win. However, it also became a little frustrating when we realized networks, like one of our values in our network leadership work, have community and cultural context that means sometimes those 5 conditions don't work, or they aren't the right 5 things for that network. And so we kind of saw a little bit of a rebuke of collective impact and questions about that. And especially as we have become more of a community that can talk about representation and equity and diversity in networks, we started asking questions about who's running these things, right? Who's in charge and who has the power? and being able, so the shift kind of to networks, where I would kind of argue that we are today, is a role around a lot of the context in which Peter just described networks, which is questions about our one best way. You know, how do we create networks that are regenerative? How do we have distributive leadership and equitable ways of working? So networks today are everywhere. Here's where I'm going to ask everyone to, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I'm going to ask a question. Okay, so if you haven't right now, go to your gallery view and put your video on. I don't know how many people can show up on a Zoom screen, but here's my answer. Okay, how many of you are part of at least one network? And you can just raise your hand. Again, you can even like wiggle it a little if you want to be noticed. So I don't see anyone on here who is not wiggling their hand, although I'm having to scroll across 4 screens. I was hoping I'd see like 80 little, you know, tiles. Okay, how many of you are part of 2 networks? So I still see a ton of hands and I'm only on 1 screen. Okay, I'm going to go to 4 networks. Okay, I see a few, yes, less, but more. And okay, I'm just going to skip all the way up to who is part of 8 or more networks. So not as many, but still a couple. I see some kind of gingerly doing this. So now I'm going to ask you just one question. How many of you think there's at least one network in your life that you could get rid of? This is a real honest confession that you'd really like to step away from right now because you are over-networked and it just feels a little overwhelming. So not as, there they go. Here come our hands. It is like, okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and back and share my screen. That was my version of a poll. What we know is that we are over-networked right now. And I'm going to tell you why this is more of a problem than it might be just, you know, a little inconvenient. I can't get my screen back for you all, so I'm going to go without your videos. Networks take time. They take money and resources from things, meaning they take time and resources from us. But I'm going to exit for a second so I can get my Zoom control back. But they also take resources from our organizations and the people and communities we're asking to be a part of those networks. And so it's kind of awesome that networks are so prolific and that they can answer big questions, but it's also creating its own inequities and its own resource, you know, suck from some of our communities. So it's kind of not okay that we're all involved with all of these networks and so many of them are so redundant. And the truth is we're constantly, you know, many of us are focused on communities where we think networks can be the most helpful, where networks can solve the most wicked, difficult problems, and yet those are the communities with often the least amount of resources to participate in networks. So when a new funder comes in, or a new initiative, or a new policy that says we need to get all these people together to network, what happens is we're asking them to take time away from the things they're trying to do, which might be serve people, and instead we're asking them to do network work. So I am a big fan of networks, but I'm also a big fan of reducing redundancy, trying to be smarter about how we do this network work so that we can actually deliver more direct services while leveraging the collaborative advantage that networks bring. So what I do know, this is my most beautiful picture I can find on the internet of a cemetery, a graveyard, is that there is a graveyard out there where networks go to die. And when these networks go to die, we have often hung on to them for way, way, way too long. And what we know is that they took a lot of time and resources, and that there are a lot of people who put a lot of heart into them. So how can we better understand when a network is done, when we should be done with it, and when it should go to the graveyard, and when we should persist and carry on that network, and how can we do this in a more equitable and smart and efficient way so that people can leverage these connections, this rich social fabric that we already know exists in communities, rather than continuously building new networks. So that's the angle by which I will finish and go through the rest of this talk. The way that I'm going to go through this is I'm going to do a little bit of network science, kind of geeky stuff. I'm also a professor, so this is where that pops out. I'm going to do a network science in action example, and then we'll have a QA. The rest of this day, our session together, we will do one more breakout where we get to answer some questions and do reflection together. And we're going to end at the end of the day with a tool, a resource for you all to use as you go forward on building your network strategy. So we're going to make sure that you have time to talk time to think. You're working and playing with your boards and things like that. So right now I'm going to ask for a volunteer, or I'll just ask you, for anyone who's been playing with their board, if you can go ahead and put it up like this. Let's just see what those artists, okay, good. Andy is the one that I can see because I only have a few people in here. So Andy, thanks for putting yours up. We don't have to have explanations of them just yet. I'll have to ask that later. So Andy, I'm going to pick on you throughout my whole talk. Is that okay? Do we have a deal? Okay, Andy's going to be my partner in this, so I don't have to find amongst 80 people others. So what I'm going to do also is probably ask for one other. I'm not looking in the chat. So this little board right now is just meant to just be a little play space. So we'll get to it in a minute. All right, so I'm going to talk about network science as a unique lens for thinking about this work that we're doing in the world. All right, so in network science, there is a basic principle that has guided me on all of my work, and it's that more is not necessarily better. So what I'm going to do, and some of you probably have seen this if you've attended any of my talks before, but I just love it. I want you to think for a second about you, and you are that orange node right there, right? And each of us who have come to this session today we are embedded in our own social networks, right? Our own social systems, our social support systems. And that's what you're seeing here is each of us connected to our own, what I'll call a sub-network. So I have one, you have one, and your neighbor next to you on the little screen, they have one, right? So what's happening is we often connect ties in a term Peter just used in a homogeneous way. We tend to connect to people because they are like us. They share similar beliefs and values. They go to the same things we do. They have similar access to resources as we do. And that is this homophily is a theory of birds of a feather flock together. And that's how networks are typically formed. But what's happening, and it's happening at an increased rate, is that networks are, all of us are reaching across those networks and creating lots of ties. And that's what those little dotted lines are. And it's crazy. We have LinkedIn, Twitter, all the different ways, not to mention just all the opportunities to go out in the world pre-COVID to connect with everyone in all kinds of different ways. We call these our weak ties. So our strong ties are those that we build closely. The weak ties are those that we build across boundaries. And there was a guy back in the 70s, Mark Granovetter, a sociologist, who did his dissertation work on how people get jobs. And his theory was if people connect across these weak ties, they'll get jobs. But what he found, which was so interesting, is that there is a strength to having weak ties, but it's not because of these ties, our strong ties that we know of people like us, because those people probably know about the same jobs that we know about. So instead, these people who are in these other sub-networks out here, they have access to things we don't know about, right? They increase our mindset. They increase the diversity of what we know. And there is a strength to connecting to them. He called it the strength of weak ties. And that, I would say, to this group is why we're here, right? Because we believe in the strength of weak ties, that working together is better, and that if we build these kinds of networks, then we're going to be able to have better outcomes. So the problem with this is that these cost a lot, right? If this is you in your personal life, that's fine, go have fun. But now you as an organization or a community leader or someone trying to construct a network strategy, it's not efficient. We only have 40 hours in the work week. Each of these costs a lot. Nobody's budgeting for their relationship budget, and it's becoming overwhelming. So let's look at an alternative to this. So an alternative to this might look like this. So there was a guy named Ron Burt who came from a business perspective. So he said, Mark Granovetter, those are interesting ideas, but that is not efficient and effective. So here's an alternative, and the alternative says, what if we can take advantage of having these sub-networks, but instead of all that redundancy, we build what he calls structural holes, and he said this will increase our social capital. He meant an individual thing, but we often think about social capital in a community sense, but what he says is, if we can reduce redundancy, I can, for example, connect to these two orange nodes. Those two people might be gatekeepers, people who have connections to other politicians or funders and things like that. And if I can figure out who the right person to trust is, who has the right connections to those other folks, I can reduce all of the redundancy in my connections, and I can get the same collaborative advantage when I need to activate these networks. And what that does, it allows me to actually build new relationships to new subnetworks. So now here I have a more diverse network, but fewer connections. And this is important because what we learned by doing a lot of research on this is that when people build networks, you know, a funder, let's say, funds a network, and they come back in 6 months and say, what have you done with all of our money? And people will often list their partners, and they'll list how many meetings they've had, for example. And so what we need to do is, and so the only way to be successful at showing our funders and our those stakeholders holding us accountable that we're doing good work is to build more networks, more connections, more people, and continuously tap into this community resource of relationship building for our effort. Alternatively, imagine if we said to our funder, well, we started out with a lot of connections, but then we decided to go this path, and here are my 3 connections, and here's why they're really important when I activate them and what they get us when we leverage those resources. And we start building a strategy that allows us to use fewer resources and a more intentional way of managing these relationships. So, and people ask me a lot, like, you know, how do we actually use this work in our lives? But I use this in my personal life all the time. I don't copy everyone on emails. If I have to make a relationship to an organization, I try to discover the one person who I need to have that relationship with and not build it with everyone else, because I frankly do have 3 kids and a few jobs, and I don't have time for all the things. So we need to do this even in our own lives. And we can manage these relationships to create these kinds of strategies, but I fully and wholeheartedly, and this is where the geeky side of me comes out, is believes that we need data to do it. So I'm going to show you some examples of getting data for this. So what I'm going to ask you to do, though, with your boards now is a little activity. And normally we would do this in 2 ways, either as a huge group, as in groups, actually, in the room. But since we're home alone, I'm going to ask you to do something right now. I want you to take your board and your thumbtacks and rubber bands, and I want you to put together your personal network. So put you in the middle. You can use little pieces of paper if you want to put labels of who they are. Pick people who you go to when you need help, when you need, or you have want to talk about important matters with. Who would you put in your network? You can put them around, and then use the rubber bands to show who of those people know each other. You can also use the rubber bands to show something else, okay? But I'm going to let you decide what that is. If you did not receive your board and rubber band, I want you to go into your journal, and on page, let's find it, 4 and 5, you're going to see these maps, and you see an example of a filled out one here. So, or you don't want to use your thumbtacks and rubber bands, you can draw it. So here on the left side, you're going to be able to put the people in the rings, and you can put your strong ties close and your weak ties on the outer sides. And then you can draw the map on the right side of the page. So alternatives, if you have this, and if you don't have this journal because you didn't get it in the mail, it is in the Thinkific resource. So you should, I'm not watching the chats, just so everyone knows, it's too distracting. So Robin can help you find where this is if you need it to just pull up on your computer screen. So that's your instructions. I'm going to continue on my talk while you go through the next step of your maps, okay? I'm going to let you try. Here's some pictures of how we would have done it in the past in our rooms together. Okay, so while you're working on that, I'm going to tell you a story of one of my own personal networks. So this is kind of where we can talk about how network science happens in real life. So this is a network that is a real network. It's actually, usually I would ask people, you know, what do you think this is? But I'm going to give it away. So this is a network map of planning a wedding. So let me tell you this story. So about 12 years ago, I was getting ready to get married, and I was going through all of the parts of that activity, you know, flowers, venue, all the things. And I got to the point where it was like, how am I going to get everyone into one big room and seat them? Kind of like, how do you run a Zoom meeting for 80-some people for an event you don't usually do? So lots of ways you can think about networks as problem solving. So what I did is, you know, as we were trying to kind of figure out those things, I said to my then to be husband at the time, don't worry, I have a tool. I have network science, and I'm going to take all of these members of this wedding party. I'm going to put them in my network tool, and I'm going to just give everyone one connection to someone else. And when I do that, and then I'm going to map it out, and I'm going to see if that can help us figure out how to seat people at the wedding reception. And I was going with a couple of theories I was trying to figure out. So one was seat people who know each other together, seat people who don't know each other together because they'll just love each other, right? Or, and which way should I go? So what I did is I put everyone in and I drew the map. And when you are doing a network analysis and you draw the map for the first time, it's when it's like the winning moment, right? You either know you completely messed up your data, or you get to this point where you see something you hadn't seen or known before. And that happened with me when I did this. And what I saw when I mapped this out was what a really important thing. What you're going to see over here, hopefully you can see my mouse. Lisa, can you see my mouse? Because I can see you. Okay, so this is all called one big component. And so a component in a network map means everyone's connected to at least one other person in that component. So I saw this, and then I saw these little sections out here. And because I coded it by the colors, I knew what these were. So let me tell you what it is. What I knew right away was this section, this group out here, was my husband's friends and family, high school buddies, all that kind of thing. This is my family here. And then these are a lot of my friends from AmeriCorps, kayaking, grad school, all the things I had done. And then there's a few places where we mix, but I learned something really important that day, that he was coming into this relationship with a totally different kind of social network than I was. He has people who all know each other. They've known each other for a very long time, and they all stay connected. My experience through life has been different. I don't have networks that persist like that over time in these large groups. I have a theory about this. So I always say this, I hope not to offend anyone. It's actually intriguing to me, but I think it's because he's from the Midwest. And I have found by visiting the Midwest and knowing his family and friends that they stay very well connected. I've been to parties where whole high school couples are all from the same high school. And they will, when they find him on Facebook, they don't just like his stuff, they message him, get his address, and they come over to visit. I'm from El Paso, Texas, where we were a little bit about, I think, more spreading your wings and going out to see what else in the country there was to experience. And, my friends and family were not quite as connected as well. So this for me was just like such an aha moment. And this is what I hope that you get from this whole experience at the NLTA, is just filled with aha moments, because this was informative. It has played out in all kinds of interesting ways in my life. And I'll tell you the end of the story really quick. What we did at the wedding, we didn't seat anyone, too much divorce, too much that kind of stuff. So we just let everyone pick where they were going to sit. And, now I have pictures of those tables and a little bit of another analysis of who ended up sitting where they wanted when you gave everyone just the choice to. So I love to give this example because it's an example of how network science is not actually out of our reach. Network science is an everyday tool. We're trying to deal with this in our everyday lives. And that's, one of the examples of how this is one of those examples. Okay, I'm going to keep going through this. All right, so Andy, I'm going to pick on you now, and I'm going to ask you to speak, so you're going to have to unmute. So Andy, will you share and report out your network map, what you've created there at home, and tell us where you're from and who you are?
Hi, I'm Andy Terrio. I live in Maine. I work for the Island Institute. Yeah, we do, I don't really know. So we work to help sustain island and coastal communities in Maine with community development, economic development, all kinds of many different projects, both solution sharing and solution building. So here's mine. I don't know. I feel like there's not enough tax on it.
Wait a minute. More is not better, Andy. We're
all right.
Norm. So tell us about your network.
Well, I wanted to color code, so I was glad that there was a lot of some colors. So here's me in the middle. White was like family members. So this is like my immediate family, and then my wife. And this was like, over here is like work people, so coworkers, and then like a former coworker that is only connected through me there. And then I don't forget what the yellow I forgot why I put the yellow person there, but
Nice.
in-law or something like that. But
Nice.
yeah, so just trying to think of, it's interesting to see the breakout of the connections though, like you were showing on yours. Very, very cool.
Yeah. And is that mostly, so you have a mix of family and friends, coworkers, is that true? It's just that your personal network is different or diverse in that way. So that's awesome. I'm going to ask everyone I'm going to offer some opportunities to report out again later, but not yet. I'm not going to tell you what that is. If anyone's dying to share their map real quick, put a chat in really quick. I'm actually looking at it. And of this huge group, there's someone out there who's probably pretty excited about what they just created. I'm going to give you a second here to put your name in. And if I don't see anything, okay. This happens in real life too. But in real life I can see who's done it, and I'm afraid to call. The two people I can see in my screen probably don't want me to call on them, surprisingly right now. So, oh, Bernice, is that an offer? Yes. Okay, Bernice, go for it. Go ahead and unmute yourself and show us your map. I'm going to stop sharing.
So I don't know if you can see my map. My map is.
There you are. Yeah.
So in here, I have myself is in the middle with the yellow thumbtack. And I've done a number of fellowship programs over the course of my life. And so from New Leaders Council, Strong City, Strong Communities, Capital City Fellows, EPFP Fellows. And so those are all individual networks. And what I've learned over the years is that one network that I'm also near and dear to is my Georgia State University alumni network. And folks in that network are now connecting to some of the other fellowship programs that I've done throughout the years. So there's like between GSU, myself, and like New Leaders Council networks. And then there's my job, which also connects, because I work for a progressive organization, now connects back to one of the fellowships I've done. So there are people that work at my organization that have done a number of the fellowship programs that I've done. So it creates this very unique network. Not all of the networks are connected, but I did connect all the fellowship programs because there are different listservs and jobs that are in those. So it was fun.
That's awesome. I love it. And I'm going to call on you again for sure in the next prompt. Okay. So get ready. Bernice, did you say where you were from and I'm sorry, I might've been distracted.
I'm sorry. I'm in Washington, DC. I'm at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities.
Oh, wow. See, network leadership is very diverse, you all. Like this is from budget and policy. Amazing. Thank you, Bernice. I appreciate that. And stay tuned. I'm going to call on you again. So, okay. So I'm going to go back to sharing. And I know we're kind of behind, so I'm going to talk fast, which isn't that unusual for me, but I'm going to try to see what I can get through because I love this stuff. Okay. Here is one more lesson in network science. I kind of went to some real life stuff, and now I'm going to go to this one because I think it's really important. This is my map of the life cycle of a sustainable network, and it looks matrixy because literally when I was at the Rand Corporation trying to build tools and things like that, I needed to talk to a lot of people about this stuff, and I didn't know anyone who was doing it. And so this was my first slide, and I mean, I'm talking like 16 years ago, and here it is still. So what I want you to do is when you look at this slide with me, look in the middle here, and you can see the squares and the circles. Those are our nodes. Let's call those organizations in a community, and let's say those organizations just got a grant and they were asked to build a new network to tackle a big problem. Okay, so what you're going to see in these 4 pictures around is that those nodes, they don't move. They don't move location. They are the exact same nodes in every picture. What's different are the lines, which is how I want to talk about how we can manage and think about strategizing in our network. So what happens in almost every life cycle of a network is that in phase 1, they say, we just got money, yay, let's build a network. And they bring everyone together who should be at the table. And the first thing they do at the first meeting, I've been at a lot of these, is we make a list of who's not already at the table. Perfect. That's what networks are meant to do. So we make that list, and very quickly we get to, whoops, I have a fancy, hold on, animation. So that was phase one. So phase two is we connect the nodes. So we invite those people who aren't already connected to the network together, and we ask them to come be a part of it. Very natural, normal, happens usually pretty fast, maybe a little bit longer. And then we pretty quickly get to phase three, which is our more is better approach. Let's have more meetings, let's build connections, let's make this thing happen. And I would guess that, I make up these numbers, 85% of networks out in the world are right here. And this is where we persist. And this is why so many of our networks go to the graveyard, because we're not really sure what the end is. When is this going to end? The people who come together get really excited, but then we start to be less accountable, less energetic. We're in 5 other networks and we're just overwhelmed and we just don't know what the next step is. So let's imagine that we have done a little bit of data work and we understand now some different things about our network, and now we're in phase 4. We've decided on 4 strategies. We've divided into 4 work groups. People have a role. We've told them what the role is and when they're going to play it. And we've identified a couple of folks who can be our connectors, our bridgers. And so let's say in this case, this work group here meets once a month, this one once a week, this one once a year, and this one only quarterly. And those work groups do what they need to do, and then they report back through the connectors. And then once a year, everybody comes together like this, and we have a big network gathering. So what we've done here is some really important network principles. We've given everyone a role. We've told them when they're going to play it. We have stopped inviting them to every single meeting when they're not of value to that meeting and giving them the break. The fear of missing out now, is so big in networks. And what we have found with this approach and through research and working with communities is that if we do this work and we learn who these right roles are and build this strategy, this network will sustain longer than the network in phase 3. People will stay more engaged. If we tell this group, we are going to do this until we reach this goal, and then we're going to disband, or we're going to be perpetual, or we're going to stay until, we evolve into something else. We give people an idea of what the end is, they will come back and they will give you their time. But if we're not doing an approach like that, we probably are going to overwhelm people. So our goal, my goal, it's as a personal goal as well as my team's, is to help networks get from phase 3 to phase 4 using data and network strategies. So that's what we're up to. And I'm going to give you all just at the end here an example of how we've done that in a project. And I can actually go through it really quick, so I'm going to, but I like to give some takeaways. So the takeaways primarily from my talk are that building and managing a network doesn't have to be left to chance. You do not have to just be a human super connector extrovert. You can actually be introvert network science geek and run the best network possible. You already are a network scientist, so all of you officially add it to your resumes. You are network scientists. You're doing it in everyday life. You can manage a network to develop a strategy, but I believe you need data to do it. And data can be stories. It doesn't have to be nodes and lines. More networking is not better networking. You can identify redundancies and holes in your network, which can inform your strategy. And that a proven strategy for network sustainability is that everyone in the network should have a role they understand. Participation is only required when that role is needed, and otherwise it's optional. And the network has a stated goal that the end includes that strategy to help the members use the fewest number of resources to reach the same collaborative advantage. They will trust you and they will come back if we're using those principles. So here's my, so for Bernice and Andy, good thing you're on my screen because talking so much, I don't want to forget anyone's names. I'm saying that out loud twice. Bernice and Andy, if you could make, and everyone on your board, if you could make one intentional change to your network, what would it be? Would you add a tie? Would you take a tie away? Would you add a person? How are you thinking about being intentional about your own personal network? So I want everyone to do that on the board because I am going to ask everyone to show their boards and a big map at the end, okay? So you have time to do that. I'm not going to ask you to do it right this second. I'm going to ask you to report out in a minute while I tell one last story. So in my last story, I'm going to let you all see one real world example of network science. I'm going to really get through this quick, but it's really the story of Visible Network Labs and my work at the Center on Network Science and how we've evolved, and network science has given us some of our biggest aha moments that we're really proud of. So I'm going to tell you just this quick story about Wonder Babies, which was a project that I worked on years ago with Ayala Talmi on thinking about the system of care for babies and young children with special health care and developmental needs. So Wonder Babies was a initiative of the Colorado Trust, and it was a question around how do we coordinate care for families with kids with special health care needs. This is what systems of care look like for people who have babies. And when you add babies who are born with special needs, it is extraordinarily complicated. You would know that out here in our audience as well as myself. We said, let's use social network analysis, which we're going to talk about through the days to come, which is a method on that collects data on who's connected to whom, how those connections vary and change, focusing on patterns of relationships, and measuring things like the type, extent, and quality of those connections. I'm not going to explain what that map is. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we did. We used our partner platform. And so this is me for a second saying, we have this amazing platform where you can collect all of these data, and we will show you and give you access to using that platform throughout this set of workshops. So partner stands for the program to analyze, record, and track networks to enhance relationships. It has a survey that you can use. People have used it from all over the country, every state in 40 countries. What does it do? You can map connections among partners using this method to track networks, visualize your partnerships, think about how members are engaging, measure perceptions of value and trust, look at how resources are leveraged, and identify gaps and opportunities, and do that work you need to get from phase 3 to phase 4, or to tell the story of your network, or to link it to outcomes. So it has a survey builder, analysis, and mapping and reporting. It's all built in. So it's like a survey monkey where you put in questions and then you can send it out to the world and you can get all the analysis done right in it. And we use it as a CPRM, which we call a community partner relationship management system. And a lot of the folks that are using it today are doing work like I'm about to explain, but in their workflow. They're not a one and done evaluation, but they're using it like a CRM, but for community partnerships to track them over time so that we can stop being so redundant in our communities. All right, so real quick, and these are some of our big partners. Sorry, this slide is kind of stuck in there. All right, let me tell you this quick story about Wonder Babies. We went out into the world, we used Partner, Ayala and I did. We asked the people in Colorado who connected, who are you connected with to serve this population, and this is what we learned. I'm not going to tell you all the results, but basically this was the network in Colorado. The middle is our core. Outside of it is what we refer to as our periphery. Primarily the middle was more of our urban areas, but this was the map of organizations and the connections between them showing coordinated care. Someone asked us, we started going around the state to show our data. Someone asked us, where are the mental health agencies in that network? So we were able to pull out mental health. You see the blue nodes. We were able to see that those are not really well connected if you took away all the yellow nodes, but they are dispersed across the state. So it gave us questions about strategy. What do we need to do? Connect them, or is it good that they're dispersed? We looked at it by counties. We saw Tri-County there, Adams, Arapahoe, Douglas, which is urban, well-connected, Weld County, a rural county, not well-connected. And it gave us a lot more insight into this network and how it was working. We went out and we asked people to do thumbtack and rubber band exercises to tell us what the ideal network was. What is your ideal network, and how can we use this idea or this data to improve it? So we asked systems people those questions and they loved it, right? They loved seeing themselves in the network. They loved building these strategies. But then we went to families and we said, families, tell us how this data can help build better coordinated cares for you. And they hated our study. They said, those maps that you're showing us don't represent anything that I experience. I don't know where I am in that map, and nothing is coordinated for me. And all this looks like is a big ball of rubber bands, and I don't care what this system is doing. And Ayala and I realized in that moment that we were doing something really wrong. And they asked us where the family was in the network, and we don't have a family node in this network. So we shifted our thinking fast, and we said, what is the outcome of a high functioning system? Is it that our organizations work well together? Or is it that families, like we were told, know who to go to when they need help? And so in that moment, we said to these families, forget our exercises, take down the PowerPoints, get out a piece of paper and draw your social support network. And we used an egocentric approach in that way, a network science approach, which asked people to do what you just did. Tell us what your social support network looks like. And they did. And what we learned from them was that they would list friends and family and other network members or other families and community members. And then they would say, I don't care about that system, and I prefer to get my help from my informal supports. And so, and this is a picture of one of those that we put into a slide to kind of show their center, people's core. Every one of us on this call right now prefer to have an informal social support network before having to tap into the systems around us. And yet we continuously build the perfect system and measure systems and put money into it. So this really shifted things for us. You know, we sent surveys out to families at some point to really try to understand social support networks. And we learned two important things. One, that families have a preference for tapping into their informal supports first. And two, that people want to help themselves and want to be resilient and not dependent or a burden on a system. And, you know, our whole approach was, and a lot of us on this call, is about building systems that people can fit into. So we started asking some pretty big questions, like, why do we expect people to fit into this system? And why don't we expect this system to fit around people? Why aren't we building adaptable systems? And if this system is actually coordinated, then it should be reflected in the personal networks of families. So our outcome measure, rather than this beautiful network map, might be that when 100% of families say that their personal networks are coordinated, then we know that the system is working. So I used to always end my talks and I would say, one day I'm going to build a tool that can help us understand personal support networks and needs. And then I will go back to systems building work and help to build adaptive systems to respond to those variations. Like an impossible task, but then we got into the Innovator Society, we got some funding, $65,000, and we built the Person-Centered Network App, which is another tool that we have been able to integrate into pediatric care clinics, schools, all kinds of places that helps people quickly show what you're doing on these boards through an app. The reason that matters, it's a fun tool, it's interesting, but the context in which we built it is a tool to assess the strengths and gaps in a person's personal support network, which allows them to use the information allows a provider, for example, a teacher or anyone, to make personal assessments of a person's needs so they can connect them to resources. So we have seen this used in home visiting, schools, firefighters were some of our very, very first users, visiting high utilizers in communities. And we have a number of grants now where we are experimenting with this to figure out how in just a few minutes you can understand one of the most invisible things about us, which are our social connections. So it works like this, and we use this egocentric network science approach to let people create a network map, swipe connections. I won't go through what all the questions are, but we do look at quality of those connections, like the degree to which people depend or trust on their others in their social support networks. And here's just a really key moment. We ask people what they need, and then we ask them who helps you with the things you need. So rather than saying to a family, what do you need? Here are the system's resources. We pause and we say, what is your personal asset? What is the family, the social support network that you bring to your care? And how can we leverage that before we send you out to the system? So it's a very subtle intervention, but it's this moment where we say, in this case, it looks like you have a lot of help with child-related issues and maybe some food, but you are having trouble getting a job. So now let's let the system wrap around you in the thing you most need with the least amount of social support. So we're really excited about this, and you know, it can be used in all kinds of ways to look at an aggregated level of your community. This is my daughter who helped me realize the benefit of using this with kids. Kids being able to talk about the things that they're struggling with. You'll see the list over there are not adult things, but kid things. And then constructing their social support networks, showing us who they depend and rely on, and being able to describe the things that they're struggling with around their social connectedness through technology and a tablet, I can tell you they lean in. You hand them this tablet, you tell them to draw pictures of this, and it is a new voice for kids to have around their mental and behavioral health. And we are just innovating on this in all kinds of different ways. And that's the end of that story. And the point of that story for all of this is that, what I want to do is challenge all of you through this workshop that we're going to go through together. You all have different things you're doing. We have tons of food networks here. We have public health. We have education networks. We have all kinds of things represented, budget and policy. And you have problems that you're trying to solve in the world. And I think that all of us in this team really strongly believe that network science and this network lens, through all of the ways that you will hear about it over the course of these next few sessions, can help you come up with these kinds of innovative solutions. I'll challenge you to think that more is not better, to think about the outcome that you are measuring and why you might be wrong, and to just really think about how these resources can be used that you're going to learn over these days to come up with ideas in ways that you wouldn't have coming into it, even as the most amazing network leader already in your community. So that's my hope for you all. And I like to give this example to show you how even me, who I feel like I kind of know this stuff really well, I get aha moments weekly in my work by applying this thinking. All right, so I'm just going to end with our two quick report outs of our personal network maps. So Andy and Bernice, let me start with Bernice this time. Bernice, I wonder if you wouldn't mind, there you are. Okay, if you had to make one change, what is it?
I actually took something off. I used to do education policy work, but I long found that, education is just a segment of broader public policy and budgeting concerns. And it's just not a network that I am deeply invested in anymore. So I actually took that off and I added friends, because what I'm finding is the networks that I am deeply connected to, like NLC, GSU alum, SE2, like those are people that I actually invited to my wedding. So like there were, and I was like, so these are people outside of just those networks, that these are now personal friends from those networks that I call on. And so I just made a separate one and just removed the education fellowship from the page.
You gave yourself permission to exit a network. Congratulations. Yeah. That's a huge step. It's pretty hard to say no to a network, but that's amazing. Thank you. Okay, Andy, your report out.
So I just started thinking about, there's not much changed, but one thing that I started thinking about is how would I put those buckets together, like you were saying, like childcare and and how those kind of, when I deal with issues or problems in work or with life, where are the networks I lean on, and then thinking about how those are interacting, I think is just might be a more interesting way, or a different way of kind of trying to throw it together, to map it out, to get a better sense of actually how I use the network, more than just there's a bunch of people that I am connected to.
Yeah. Awesome. I couldn't have asked for a better report out from both of you. You're both thinking like network scientists, giving us ideas. You don't have to have any answers right now, but if we can shift your mind a little bit, do a mindset shift around how you were thinking about networks to now, then we've accomplished this day. So, okay, I'm going to end there. I want to welcome and invite all of you to reach out to me. I love this stuff. I love talking about it. I'm a super geek about it. And I have a team that actually is the same. So stay connected with us, and we'll be bringing this in to all 6 sessions. So it's just been a really fun opportunity to get to launch the NLTA today with this, one of my favorite talks.